Welcome to the Cyber Rants Podcast, where we're all about sharing the forbidden secrets and slightly embellished truths about corporate cybersecurity programs. We're ranting, we're raving, and we're telling you the stuff that nobody talks about on their fancy website and trade show giveaways, all to protect you from cyber criminals. And now, here's your hosts, Mike Rotondo, Zach Fuller, and Lauro Chavez.
Hello, and welcome to the Cyber Rants Podcast. This is your co-host, Zach Fuller, joined by Mike Rotondo and Lauro Chavez. And today we are continuing our mini-series about penetration testing. Lots to talk about. It'll be a good episode. Mike, why don't you kick us off with the news?
Hey, greetings. How are you doing today, everybody? Headlines for today. I'm going with the FBI to start out with. The Internet Crime Complaint Center, which is affectionately known as ICU3, received a record number of complaints from the American public in 2020. Surprise, surprise. 791,790, with reported losses exceeding $4.1 billion, that's with a B, dollars. This represents a 69% increase in total complaints from 2019. BEC, or business email compromise schemes, continue to be the costliest. Almost 20,000 complaints with an adjusted loss of almost $2 billion. Phishing scams are also prominent with 241,000 complaints, about 54 million in losses. Ransomware continues to rise with 2,400 incidents reported in 2020. Over the years, and then finally, state and local governments also had a 5% increase in losses from 2019 to 2020. They lost over 1.8 billion. Crime is out there. Be careful. Cybersecurity bug hunting sparks enterprise confidence. We're going to kind of touch on this a little bit in today's podcast, but nearly 3/4 of IT professionals surveyed say they prefer to buy technology and services from vendors who are proactive about security. That includes pen tests, including leveraging ethical hacking and having transparent communications about vulnerabilities. But they believe less than half the vendors actually deliver. 74% say that ethical hacking, bug hunting to find vulnerabilities is highly important. So you're a software company, get a pen test. And there's a place called Silent Sector that doesn't. Anyway, FBI, one type of scam is costing business the most. That is this new scam. It used to be you pretended to be the CFO and tell someone to transfer money. Now they're doing tech support fraud. So you're getting a call from a bank saying you're from tech support. They want you to go ahead and give them your password so you can log in and unlock your account. I got 3 of those spam emails today alone. Microsoft fixes Office issues causing memory and disk space errors. Yay, Microsoft. Microsoft has addressed a known issue causing memory and disk space errors when you're opening Word or Excel. This primarily function hits the Microsoft Office apps from the Microsoft Store. There's a new ZH-Trap botnet malware, which deploys honeypots to find more targets. Basically, this botnet is hunting down and transforming infected routers, network devices into honeypots that help it find other targets to infect. And once it does, the insidious part of this thing is it blocks all other malware using whitelisting. So interesting stuff. There's another banking Trojan out called Metamorpho. This started as a Latin American banking Trojan back in 2018. It uses the legitimate binary used for creating shortcut keys in Windows to use malware to sneak past defenses. So careful out there. Top MSP challenges in 2021 are growth, remote working, and DNS. So you may want to look in your new SASE programs. Microsoft Azure SDK site tricked into listing fake packages. A security researcher was able to add counterfeit test package to official list of Microsoft Azure SDK latest releases. So be careful what you're pulling down. From the Justice Files, the Tampa Twitter hacker agrees to 3 years in prison. You remember the guy that did the $100,000 in Bitcoin hack on Twitter? He's going to jail for 3 years.
Is it really a hack if you work there and you have admin access? I don't know.
I think theoretically, yeah, it's still it's a rogue admin, but it couldn't happen to a nicer company like Twitter. Serious security, the Linux kernel bugs that surfaced after 15 years. There are 15-year-old bugs that are showing up that found in the kernel code that implements iSCSI. They're CVE 2021-27365, CVE 2021-27363, and CVE 2021-27364. Buffer overreads, buffer issues, basically. Google fixes Chrome 0-day bug exploited in the wild. So more bugs for Google. Update your Chrome. Chinese threat actors target global 5G operators. It's believed these attackers are using a phishing website masquerading as the Huawei company career page, which transfers you to a domain under control of the threat actor, where they're infected with malware, which a threat actor leverages to perform additional discovery and data collection. I don't know if we all noticed, but Microsoft had a massive outage on the 15th. Basically, there was an issue with the signing of the keys rotation and token invalidation issues. As Microsoft explained, the authentication and login issues behind yesterday's outage were caused by an error that affected the correct rotation of signing keys used to support Azure AD's use of OpenID. I can tell you from personal experience, talking to some people, they're still having issues with this. The $4,000 COVID-19 relief checks cloak Dridex malware. Cybercriminals have literally wasted no time. The new American Rescue Plan that just got passed, I don't know, it was last week or whatever. It's supposed to send out $1,400 checks to people. They're already sending out emails impersonating the IRS trying to download the Dridex Trojan. So be careful. They're just going to send the checks. You don't have to do anything. Twitter images can be abused to hide zip and MP3 files. Researcher David Buchanan attached example images to his tweets that include simple pictures but hide zip archives and MP3s. You just have to download and change the file extension, and then contain the entire content of the file. So, last but not least, check your Zoom settings under Personal. Look and see what data centers you're leveraging, and apparently all of them are checked. That includes China, India, Australia, Singapore. You may want to just use the U.S. or some other place where you're from, but may not be the best route through China. And that's the news, Laurel.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Zoom, for not telling us we're being routed through whatever data center you feel like at any given time. So, yeah, make sure you change that. From an exploit perspective, a couple interesting things have dropped this week, especially around, and not specific to what they are, right? I mean, we're always going to kind of see the same authentication bypass or injection, right? I mean, those are really kind of the main flaws in code that allow you some good caltrops that you can drop, right? And so I think what's more is the intent that this is the software that these exploits are, and there are like 14 of them towards specific 4G connected security surveillance software made by KC Tech, Jayton Tech, and Noatel. If you're running Soyal or KZ Tech or Jayton, these are not US based. These are not, I would say, A quadrant technologies, but they're probably affordable technologies that you can obtain that do the same job as the A-level technologies. So there may be some companies here that are using these. Liquid Worm dropped quite a few, all kinds of the worst of you could imagine for this type of surveillance software. So if you're using those types of software, again, KZ Tech, Jayton, and Noatel, and Soyal, make sure you're looking at the versions and you want to upgrade those to the most recent. And that's really all that's worth talking about from an exploit capability. It's not how vulnerable you are, it's how exploitable are you.
Yeah. Yeah, you can have 1010s on your scanner, but if they're not exploitable, what's the point?
Exactly.
Excellent point. Well, speaking of which, that's where pen test could come in, isn't it? Today, we'll talk about a bit more, dive deeper and deeper into pen testing. Last week, we talked about it at a high level and some of the things that we're seeing out there in the industry. And some are good, some are not so good, and some just are. So today we'll talk briefly about, and Mike, this touches on the article that you mentioned. Basically, companies want to see companies get pen tested, right? They're vendors. And I think that's probably the most common request that we get. An organization that maybe hasn't had a penetration test before, or hasn't had one recently, or maybe they are in a tempo and they're doing it annually or something like that. Either way, they need somebody to come in and do the pen test, largely in part because it's a request to their client. And so that's very, very common. And as such, your penetration tests can either be a big asset for the organization, or it can be a hindrance. It can actually make you look bad. So we talked a bit about some of the differences last week, but let's dive into some of the scoping considerations and some of the areas. If your task, if your organization has to get a penetration test, not even, of course, as a best practice, you should be doing them anyway. But let's say a client wants one, what do you think they're going to be looking for out there? What types of things are they going to want in a penetration test?
Good question, Zach. And there are a lot of expectations, I think, that you can get out of a penetration test. We can get into the details of what the report should look like, but I think in general, you should be looking for the value that it provides you. You should be looking toward, the methodology, and we'll get into that, right? But essentially, the pen test should tell you what your risk and attack surface look like today for whatever target you pointed it at. And that's something also that we should talk about, right? But I mean, really, at the highest level, when you get that report, it should tell you what the risk is. And that's all going to depend on the type of pen test, right? The methods, what you paid for. If you did a code analysis, if you did a black box, you're going to get different results. There's going to be different data, but that data should all tell you a type of risk that you have for the attack surface that was looked at. And if there is something that is exploitable there that is worth, going to be time, money, people, that sort of thing to resolve, or was it trivial items, right? And I think that's really what you're going to want. That's what I want out of it. I want to know what the risk state is. When I have a home inspector come look at the house, I want to know what I'm going to have to fix after I buy it. I think that's probably the easiest analogy that I can provide, is that you should get some data out of it. And here's the other thing too, is that there's going to be times where you've been a proactive organization and you've done this over and over again. You've embedded lots of good cybersecurity practices and defense in depth methodology and this whole bit. And you need to pay for a penetration test, right? It's time for that. And you can pick whoever you want, and they're going to come at you with their tools and their manual techniques, and they may not find anything. If your infrastructure is configured to drop packets, I think they're not going to be able to really obtain any usable place if you've got a lot of whitelisting. So that report may come back and say you've just done an outstanding job of providing a defense in depth strategy and protecting the attack surfaces that you have to put on the public facing Internet of Things. And that's a good thing, right? It's like getting a gold star or an A+ report, or getting a home inspection. It doesn't have anything other than the faucet should be changed, which would just be an outstanding ordeal. And if you can live with the faucets that are there, you don't have to spend any money. That's a whole different conversation than there's termites in the foundation, where it's going to cost lots of money. And you may have to dedicate people or time, but the value is there if the information makes sense to the organization and gives you a sight of risk.
One of the other things that you want, and it's kind of, is to show that you're remediating your risks, right? So if you have a pen test and then they find things, and then you have a follow-up test, you can show that, look, we have this risk. We identified it because we're proactive in our security, and then we fix it, and here's the clean report. The other thing, going back to the report, I want to talk about is that, that's the difference between a manual report and a automated report. So Laura, when you were talking about how, you may find nothing in the test, well, with those automated scanners and that kick out the reports, that's where you're going to see the happy birthday attack and the golden poodle attack and all these attacks that really mean nothing, right? So they're all going to be reported. Yeah, they're all going to be reported as, attacks and vulnerabilities, when in reality, they're not exploitable. So, you want to be concerned about what you're paying for, who's doing it. Are they really paying attention to it? Are you just getting some machine language out of the human interaction spit out onto paper that you then have to justify and explain, and that could, in theory, cause you to spend a lot of cycles chasing down something to fix something that doesn't really need to be fixed? So we see that a lot.
A lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing that a lot of people get caught up in the jargon and the terminology that don't have a background in this. So a lot of times we'll get somebody, they might have a tech background, but not in pen testing, not in cybersecurity. And they'll come and they say, hey, we need this tested. And sometimes they'll be sold certain things and what they need, and not really reality. So different different people get asked about things like white box versus black box penetration testing, for example. Some organizations will say, hey, you need everything. You need everything from static code analysis to we need somebody there at your office doing wireless pen testing and such. And in some cases it's true, and others it can be a bit exaggerated. So I think defining how you get the most bang for your buck can be tough. One of the things though that we tell people, a lot of times you've never done any penetration testing before. A lot of times it makes sense to start with, if you're looking at, say, your network environment or even a web app in some cases, it might make sense to start with a black box penetration test. And what a black box pen test is basically an attack from a external attacker's perspective with very little information, almost no information about the target. So they don't have any user credentials. They don't have your architecture diagrams or anything like that. They're just basically going after a specific IP or URL and looking at it that way. And so a lot of times I refer to that as a drive-by approach, right? And to do an initial round of testing, I think that's step number one anyway. So organizations, especially that are on a budget and such, that can be a great place to start. Now, it's not going to reveal as much as a more in-depth pen test, but it's a good place to start. And then the opposite end of the spectrum would be a white box penetration test, right? And that's where the tester has complete information about the environment. They have the diagrams, they have user credentials, they probably even have the code base, and really can take a granular look at the program. And this can make more sense when you're looking at it from maybe potential insider threats, right? Large organizations, massive numbers of employees might prefer to take that approach on a regular basis. But it doesn't necessarily make sense for everything. I think a lot of times in the web app space, at least, we do a lot of gray box testing, right? And that's basically a little bit of information, including some user credentials to test the application. The reason why we recommend that is because people have, there are so many stolen user credentials out there available on the dark web and deep net that they're easy to come by, and so many people are guilty of reusing their user credentials. The gray box application makes a lot of sense. So I just wanted to touch on those three because I know that is a common question. People ask, what should we do? And really it comes down to speaking on a case-by-case basis, but at a high level, those are the approaches that you'll come across.
Well, so let's tie that back into what we were talking about in the B2B space, in that it's a moneymaker. Pen tests are actually a moneymaker, believe it or not. Your clients want the confidence to know that you're being tested, right? They want to know that you're proactive in your cybersecurity, and if you can show that someone from outside your organization has gone through your application and tested it and torn it up, you have a great way of differentiating yourself from your competitors. And
I'd say that's the single most common request from especially larger companies of their vendors is, when was your latest pen test and what was the scope of it? And they want to see that. You get to understand what was done.
Yeah, and usually I think it's safe to say that usually the organizations that we see that are asking for pen tests are for two reasons: is that they have a client that's requesting it, that's going to make them money if they get it and can show that it's good, or they're in a compliance initiative, again, because of clients that are requiring this, right? Customers that are requiring this type of compliance state that then requires annual or biannual or quarterly pen testing, right? And so again, it's money driver. It is. I mean, we seldom see organizations outside the Department of Defense that just say, "Hey, we want to be as secure as possible." It's typically because they're being driven in some form by customers that are requiring that, right? Bigger organizations that may be requiring that level of assurance and confidence over the technologies.
Right. You need to match the quality of your penetration tests to the sophistication of the customer. right?
Right.
Because we've been in this, right? Those discussions with large enterprise after doing a pen test, they want to talk with the tester. They want to talk about the results. They have detailed questions, and if you have a big contract on the line, a big customer you're supporting, you have to be able to answer those. Otherwise, it undermines your credibility. And last week we talked about some of the kind of canned approaches, commoditized services and such. Those can be fine to kind of check a block and say you did it, but you need to be real careful when you're getting into discussion, because we see this regularly. It's they want to analyze what's really going on at a deeper level. Just having a penetration test, I think maybe a few years ago that was fairly standard, fairly acceptable. I think now, though, people are realizing that, hey, not all penetration tests are created equal, and they want to get more from a vendor vetting perspective probably than ever before. At least that seems in my opinion, that seems to be the way things are going.
Yeah.
What about scoping? So you have this requirement for penetration testing, might be compliance, maybe you are in fact proactive and it's it's best practice, or it's client driven. I mean, organizations of course have a lot of different pieces to their environment. Oftentimes we'll see they'll put all their focus on one part, but maybe we should touch on that briefly. You have internal network pen testing, external wireless. You got even things like physical intrusion testing the physical security around the data protection, and then of course web applications, and we see it all. What would be your recommendation to an organization that maybe has all those things? I mean, right off the bat, let's say they've never done this before. Should they go out and get everything tested, or how would you help them define the scope, assuming they're on limited resources?
Good question. I mean, I think, well, if you asking me is probably not fair, because I always want to say you should do everything up front if you've never done it before. If you have the architecture to support all of the attack surfaces for wireless and intrusion, if you've got sensitive data on site, or other types of things on site that may warrant physical break-in, or just for your applications. I mean, I'd say do it all. However, that's not realistic for everybody, and I understand that. And so I think the tempo that we see that's successful that is that you just you plan it out over a year, or maybe even 2 years, and you just chunk it out. You focus on, I guess it just depends on where you feel you have the most risk. And I think that you can always ask us, right? I mean, if you approach Silent Sector, we'll take a look and listen to what you have, and we'll give you our recommendation. But it really comes down to what you feel is going to be the most concerned that you are about risk. And that's probably where your first target should be. If that's a web app, then make it that. If you have just some random person come in and build a wireless network for you inside, and you're in a building with a bunch of other businesses, and you're just super worried that someone's just going to jump on the line. I mean, so it just depends. I think it's different for everybody, but you certainly don't have to get it all at once, but your goal should be to understand the entirety of the business's technology system and what the attack surface looks like, so you can shore those weak points up. We call that a cyber risk assessment, right? Where we do everything. We look at that holistic electronic dependencies that you have, and throw in pen testing and threat hunting and the whole bit, and give you a good analysis of where your whole business from an attack and a risk perspective look like. So that should be the goal, I think, of any organization, but everybody has to abide by their budgets. And I think it was said best by somebody I know very well, that big wars are won through little battles. So, if you can get little wins, that's great. If you can get a web application tested, even though you have 40, if you can just get one tested and demonstrated that there were some misconfigurations there, whether they were explorable or not, just to get something on the platter to serve up, to say that we're working on it. I think that's by far the best step that you can take. Wouldn't you agree, Mike? I mean, yeah,
I would 100% agree. You need to be making an effort, and just start the proactive. Every journey starts with the first step. The first step's a small pen test, then by God, go with that.
Yeah, but if you can bite off the whole chunk, I mean, it's a matter of how soon do you want to know?
Right. I mean, that would be the ideal, but small businesses may not be able to do that.
That's true. They may not be able to. But I guess if there's a high stress consideration for data on site or data in some form of technology that they're relying on, they may be concerned enough to do the whole thing. And I think we've seen that happen. It's certainly not common.
Yeah.
And it's usually not the smaller organizations, the small B2Bs that can do it, but that we've also seen them be able to accomplish it over 12 to 18 months pretty easily as well, chunking it out. But yeah, I agree that you can put it on your wish list. Maybe Santa will bring you a silent sector CRA for Christmas.
There you go. Yeah, we've also seen them have to bite the bullet and do it because they've had, a $500,000 deal hanging in the balance, right? So they've had to figure out how to do it. So, I mean, it's all that. I mean, this is customer driven, like we were talking about, from that article. It's 75% of all people want to see that you're being proactive. And that's not to discount, and we're not going to talk about this today very much, but I mean, your whole cybersecurity program, your information security program, your privacy policy, your data handling policies, and all these other things that need to dovetail in. But, the pen test is a good place to start because it shows you where your problems are from a technology perspective.
Yeah, the other stuff is easy to fix.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and with one of our programs that's specifically for B2B tech companies, we start with what we call the systems triage phase. It's part of our methodology, and going in, and that includes some pen testing right off the bat, because we want to see what the cyber criminals are seeing, right? And we want to be able to guide them in remediation of that low hanging fruit for the criminals, right? We want to get that out of the way first, because no use having that risk exposure out there, and that adds the benefit of having that done for clients and prospects that are requesting it as well. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. I think the final note that I would have on this would be that when you're looking at what to have penetration tested, a lot of companies just think about the data specifically, but for some organizations that may not be the most critical factor. It may be more systems that keep them operational, right? Maybe they need to run certain systems 24/7, or some for manufacturing plants, for example, that may have various data sources and lots of backups and things like that. But if their production systems go down, they're losing revenue immediately. So think about that. It's not always the data. A lot of times it is the data, but think about the data, but also what you are required to be operational. And then also think about your liability if a breach occurs, right? What service level agreements are you not going to be able to meet, or what data may get out there? Because those liabilities present a risk factor that's a trailing risk after the breach occurs that need to be considered. So that would be my final thought on just a very high level overview. Maybe we can get into detailed scoping later on, but for today's purposes, any other thoughts, comments, smart remarks about pen testing?
Always remember, never forget.
Yeah, I get comments. I'm not sure how smart they are. Yeah, it's important to be proactive. It's just that's the world we live in today, right? I mean, if you read the news, go to Bleeping Computer, go to any of those stories, any of those news organizations out there, Krebs even. You just see how bad things are from a cyber perspective, and you really need to stay diligent. It's not that we're a small company. We don't have anything anybody wants to steal. It's now they want to steal your compute power. Now they want to steal whatever they can from you, and you just have to stay diligent, and pen tests are key to that.
Absolutely. Yeah. My final thought is simply this. It's proactivity is necessary. Zero trust, even though it's not being talked about a lot, is happening. It's an evolutionary step that these organizations that have risked too much and spent too much money and worked too hard, they're not going to risk themselves on businesses that don't feel the same way about their technology systems. Right. So it's unfortunate you're going to get passed over, and they're going to spend more money on somebody else who does care. So it's evolve, or it's the age old thing, right? Evolve or die. You be a dinosaur, or you can turn into a primate.
Yep. And if you're paying for this stuff, if you're doing this stuff, you might as well use it as an asset to grow your revenue, to get a competitive advantage. In the future, it'll be more standard. But now, like you said from that article, based on those surveys, Mike, it's only half of companies are really delivering on this stuff. So, chances are you have a good opportunity in your space to leverage these types of activities, get a good return on investment. So thank you for joining us today. Hope you're enjoying the mini series here on penetration testing. We have a lot more to talk about. So stay tuned in. And if you like the podcast, subscribe, rate us, check out the Cyber Rants book on Amazon, and we will see you next week.
Take care, everybody.
Take care. Compute safely.
Pick up your copy of the Cyber Rants book on Amazon today. And if you're looking to take your cybersecurity program to the next level, visit us online at www.silentsector.com. Join us next time for another edition of the Cyber Rants podcast.